Here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. You know, the one thing that yesterday's show brought up is, we're not talking about the future enough. We're not pushing bold vision of what the future of work in this country is going to look like. And got a bunch of emails from folks, calling me on the reality that we're not. If you remember yesterday, I actually gave Tucker Carlson credit for coming out and saying that he would be totally against automated trucks on the highways, that they should stop. They should never allow automated trucks on the road. And his idea, his statement was, because those are jobs for people. It is the number one job for high school educated men in this country. His words, he talked about a social compact, which I got to tell you, I'm quite shocked to hear coming out of his mouth, since everything Republicans and conservatives have been doing the last 40 years has been tearing at that social compact. Now, as I said yesterday, the reality is Tucker knows there's no way you're stopping this animal from happening. Even I've been saying, you're not going to stop it. We need to legislate it. We need to regulate it. We need to tax it. We need to do a bunch of things to make it a little bit more costly so it slows down a little bit so that workers don't get screwed over like we do in every single technological change. But he's taking a position, nope, not going to allow it, because he knows it's going to happen. And it's going to give him the position to go, well, I was against it. Oddly enough, he's not against all the other automation. It's just this one, because this affects the audience, the people that put money into his pocket. But it got a lot of folks reaching out to me going, you're right. We need to be thinking in visionary, futuristic, big thoughts. And I came across last week, and I forgot about it, that there's evidently a couple of Pennsylvania lawmakers are in the process of drafting a bill that would create a 4-day work week here in Pennsylvania. As I understand it, and the details are murky at this moment, a little murky, but they're proposing some kind of a tax credit system that, for employers who offer this 4-day work week, kind of the carrot. The goal, offer a carrot so that the businesses will go, hey, I'll get this money and it'll be a win for me and I'll get happier workers. So the idea is they're going to propose this legislation to shorten the work weeks by giving these tax credits to corporations to do this. And the weird thing is this is, I think, going to eventually happen in my lifetime. I view this in the same light that you go back and you read the history of the 8-hour day. Under the flag of 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, 8 hours for what we will. Now remember, they came from the 6 days a week, sun up to sundown work day. You're talking 72 hours, 80 hours a week, down to an 8-hour day, 48 hours a week. This is one of those things. Post-pandemic, workers have lifted their head, much like they did back in that era, and began to ask the question, do I work to live or do I live to work? And now you've got people who have seen the light, have seen, hey, I like my wife and kids. Hey, I like my husband and children. Hey, that house I pay for, that place I live, I like being there more often. I like doing other things. And people have taken to it. And this purely the pandemic at work, in my view. So back in 2020, you had the World Economic Forum who did their future of work, the future of jobs predictions. And what they predicted back then was 40% of all jobs were going to eventually be remote. I think it's probably going to be at some point higher than that, but they predicted a very rapid expansion. Now, couple that with the reality that back in 2020 as well, same Economic World Forum, They said that half of all tasks that we currently do, that was back in 2020, would be done by automation by 2025. That we would be losing a lot of jobs, but it would create millions of jobs because, again, we would be doing different things, but it was almost going to be an offset. The 97 million jobs that they claimed would be created by, by automation and robotics and all this stuff would certainly be offset by, sorry, you want fries with that, no longer a job. So, this came into my head, and as I'm reading through the literature on the 4-day work week, because evidently the UK did a massive study on the 4-day work week. I guess a whole bunch of the biggest companies in the country, or in the UK, got together and did this global study. It is considered the biggest single country trial in the world, 73 companies, 3,300 employees, and they've now concluded this study. And what they found, not surprisingly, they found that 97% of the workers would like the 4-day work week to be permanent. And it's not just because they got to stay home, or they more often, or what. They were more productive. And this is the thing, they're more productive, happier, had better life-work balance, better physical, better mental health. There was so many things for the individual worker, so much better. Also good for the employer, because oddly enough, this is the weird thing. You go, well, gee, it's, you get the happy for the worker thing. They only have to go to work 4 days a week. Productivity actually went up. Employers on the whole gave it a 7.7 out of 10 approval rating. What they found is companies that took part in this actually saw their revenue increase by 8% over the trial period, and were almost 38% higher at the same point in 2021. Hiring was up, absenteeism was down. Even during the Great Quit, during the Great Resignation, they had far fewer people leaving, because this is what people want. Give the people what they want. So I look at this and go, is this something that's going to stick here? Because you've got this kind of power dynamic that the control mongers want to have. You got to be in the office where I can keep my eye on you. Now you have happier employers. The employers are happy. Profits are up. Productivity's up. Things are good. Employees are thrilled. In fact, 9 out of 10 of the employees are thrilled with it. Less burnout, less fatigue, less stress, more time home with the kids, better life-work balance. All of the positive things that we talk about. One of the big things that they took from this study is the time men spent with their children increased by 27%. Again, this is one of those things you should be grabbing the family value folks, going, hey, this is something you should be, that. Now, interestingly enough, that 27% is an interesting number, because it's the exact amount of time that was spent in the commute. So, Dad got, instead of driving back and forth to work, sitting in traffic, breathing exhaust fumes, bumper to bumper, road raging, telling the driver next to him they're number one, they're at home with the kids. That's kind of impressive. Now, I've said for years we should have been pushing for a shorter work week for years. This is something I've been calling for years, and I've wanted my labor friends to get behind. Never really the kind of push. Every recession that pops up, I say this all the time, every recession that pops up, I start calling for this 4-day work week, and then have something like unemployment fill in the gaps. But given the fact that productivity in this study remained the same, and in a lot of cases went up, this is one of those moments where you go, why should you take a pay cut for a 4-day work week when you're doing 5 days of work? Now, what they also found in this study, to be fair, is that a lot of people were doing work on their quote-unquote day off. A lot of people weren't doing full days on those 4 days. They were breaking it up. They had some autonomy over their work schedule. They had a better life-work balance, made them happier, made them more productive. Yeah, kind of a great scenario. Now, immediately I get people go, well, you're a union guy. Unions would never go for that. Yeah, they would. You can negotiate just about anything, but there've got to be parameters. You can work on your day off if you want. You're just not forced to. And this is one of those things, again, if you're happier doing what you're doing, you're going to do it, right? What's that old saying? If you find something that you love for work, you'll never work a day in your life. This is kind of that same thing. Now, again, my mind, depression during the recessions has always been, how do we keep people attached to their jobs? How do we not? Very, very, very working class ethic. Very fixing short-term problems, not looking down the road and going, hey, this should be a permanent movement. We're at a moment right now where there has to be a call. There has to be a call to revisit the Fair Labor Standards Act and take that 40-hour work week down. We've got to start pushing for a 32 or a 30-hour work week. Because understand, automation is going to be doing a lot of jobs. There's going to be a lot of technological production. There's going to be a lot of productivity because of computers, and a handful of people are going to be the ones who are going to benefit from this. So for me, by shortening the number of hours that people can work, we share the technological gains. This has not been talked about yet, and I think it's incredibly important because we need more people attached to work. If computers and robots are doing all the jobs, what do humans do? What do we, the people, do? This is one of those things where nobody wants to work 100 hours a week. Some of us do because we're stupid. But if you could support yourself on 30 hours a week, spend more time with your wife or husband, spend more time with your kids, spend more time pursuing other passions, wouldn't you? And the answer is yes. So for me, this could be that moment. This could be that moment where the labor movement leads, and I'm hoping that someone does. It says, look, it's time to revamp those 80-some-year-old, those 80-plus-year-old labor laws and update them for today. That gives workers the ability to have some flexibility in their day, shorter work weeks, shorter days, but still protections from abuse. And, I'm sure there's somebody out there going, no, we could never have a shorter work week or shorter work day. Of course we could. I go back during the Depression, and this is where, I'm not the brightest bulb in the box. The idea of having a shortened work week and then having another entity, kick in a little bit to make up the difference is not new. The Kellogg Corporation, under the robber baron who owned Kellogg's, during the Depression had a 6-hour workday. So they would come in 5 days, 6 hours, 30-hour work week, but got paid for 40. Because they knew that there was a job shortage going on. You needed to keep people employed. You needed to keep people with money for the local economy to keep moving, so families didn't lose their homes, so kids didn't be running the streets desperate. There was a social compact to steal Tucker Carlson's frame. There was something there for everybody. And the employer class of that period, the benevolent employer class, the robber barons of the era, somewhat understood that. The question is, will the robber barons of today get it? And then why aren't we pushing for it? So we're going to have a couple of the legislators from Pennsylvania on this week to talk about their proposed legislation and what this could mean. I personally think this should be a rallying cry for every worker. We need to come up with a good slogan like 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, 8 hours for what we will. We need to update it for the 21st century so that we're saying, 4 days off, 4 days a week, or 6-hour days or whatever it is. But we need to update and revive that 40-hour work week and start beginning to claw that back. The last time that I can remember reading about a real push was in the 1950s, when one of the radio broadcast unions was pushing for a 30-hour work week. I think they even asked for a 28. This is the time. I want to hear your thoughts. Are you in favor of a 4-day work week? Can you see the value? Can you see how it would be more productive? Or are you stuck on the old, got to do the 40 hours? I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
The phone lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So Elon Musk, remember yesterday we talked about Elon Musk not being able to go to the little boy's room unless he was accompanied by two big, bulky bodyguards. Remember that? Well, today, another edition of As the Elon Goes. Evidently, Elon, again, he's been kind of like a daily distraction, if you think about it. And Exhibit A on why you shouldn't give one person as much power as this guy's got because of the enormous wealth he's got. Evidently, how this story goes is he bought a company and a guy negotiated himself a job under a contract that if he ever got fired, you have to pay him a huge amount of money. So the guy said, I want to work for the company because I've built this component, this part of this company. I'm selling it to Twitter because Twitter's a bigger company. It's going to help build my vision of what I can do. And I want to be part of this. So my contract in selling this is that I remain a part of it. And that makes a lot of sense. Now, this is a disabled guy from Iceland. Just so we get the context, a guy in a wheelchair from Iceland who's, a computer genius. And evidently smart enough to get himself a contract. A working person who goes, you know what? Hey, I should have a contract because, a handshake doesn't make it anymore. So evidently Elon maybe fired him, maybe didn't fire him. They weren't really sure for a couple of days. And I guess, Elon Musk even made fun of his disability on Twitter, saying, well, he can't type, just some stupid stuff that you would expect from Elon. The reason I bring this up is not because a rich guy, ended up firing another person at Twitter. The reason I bring this up is the guy's in the power seat because he's like, fine, go ahead, fire me. You fire people all the time. You lay people off all the time. It's not a big deal. I understand it. Are you going to honor the contract I have? And this for me is another one of those moments where, you know what? Okay, you don't want me part of your company? Okay, I'm willing to go. But you got to honor the contract. And for me, we could spend all day talking about all the stuff that's going on with that. For me, what I took from the whole conversation, the Twitter thread that was very interesting, funny, and just should be a Netflix series, is that working people need contracts. Because this guy's like, fine, do with me what you want, but are you going to pay me? And if you're not, well, there's a court system for this. And I'm hoping that's the lesson that comes from that. I'm hoping that this is the lesson that ends up resonating at some point. And again, I hope my friends in labor point that out, that working people need to have, that signed document that says these are the wages, hours, conditions. These are the things that we agree to. These are the things that you agree to. And this is what happens if either of us break them. That's kind of an important thing. So as I'm looking at this, and I'm going to be following now. I'm actually following the guy because I got to know if he's going to get the $100,000 that the firing him will get him. We will see. Speaking of money, and or if Elon's check bounces. Speaking of money and the possibility of a check bouncing, evidently the House is preparing for a default. Evidently, the House Ways and Means Committee will soon be taking up a piece of legislation to require certain payments of government. So, they're going to try and make sure that when they breach the debt ceiling, it's only going to hurt certain people. I'll let that sink in. It's only going to hurt certain people. And you got to wonder who those certain people might be. Poor single mothers who've got mouths to feed. Seniors living in nursing homes. I don't know. The workers who work for the federal government. The hundreds of thousands of people who their lives depend on collecting that paycheck for coming and doing their work. What we're seeing is we're seeing them set up what is a political hit job. This debt ceiling is ridiculous. It should have never been put into place. It is plain dumb. And what they love to play on is they love to play on the idea that all of us think government operates like our kitchen table, that there is an absolute hard cap on our credit card and we can never go over. And if we do, there are all these horrible things that happen. That's not how government works. At the end of the day, our government is the backstop for everything else. If the roads and bridges need to be replaced, they need to be replaced. If there's a catastrophe, you need to raise funds to be able to take care of that. If you have hungry children, we need to be feeding them. We need to make sure that people don't go hungry on the streets. Now, what's interesting is there are people on the far right who would be okay with your children going to bed hungry tonight. They're okay with that. And I'll bet you, they'd make a religious justification for it. Blaming you for being poor, you must have done something, made someone mad. It's twisted to me how we've taken religion and turned it into some kind of angry thing. And I'll bet you they're going to come back and they're going to say the debt ceiling is part of this as well. Who's going to get hurt in this debt ceiling fight? Working people like you and me. Those government workers who are, again, stuck in the middle. Poor, hungry families. Those are the people who are going to get hurt. But again, the cruelty is always the point because it's what they do. At the end of it, Republicans hate working people. Just look at what they do to us. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1974. That was the day that workers at Farah Manufacturing finally ratified its first contract. Workers went on strike in May of 1972, demanding union recognition. Owner Willie Farah had said he'd rather die than have his company go union. It was said that he rode his bicycle through the plant screaming, "Work faster! Work faster!" Management had imposed increasingly unattainable production quotas that bred dangerous working conditions until finally the workers had had enough. The organizing drive to bring the American Clothing Workers of America began in 1969. It spread to 5 plants throughout El Paso, Texas. Workers often met in secret. Though male cutters had initially sought out representation with the ACWA, the workforce was overwhelmingly comprised of Mexican American women. The workers staged a walkout in March of 1970. 1972, and many were fired on the spot. By May of that year, the firing of workers at the San Antonio plant for union activity prompted a strike. Declared an unfair labor practice strike, the AFL-CIO began a national boycott campaign of FARA products. The ACWA organized public support and strike relief. Women strikers embarked on a nationwide speaking tour as part of the Justice at FARA Strikers Committee to build the boycott and public support. By early 1974, the NLRB ordered the workers to be reinstated and union organizing to go forward. The contract included wage increases, seniority rights and job security, and grievance procedures. But long-term lessons of the strike proved that the work of organizing could never stop with winning recognition and a first contract. Workers continued to battle for years against quotas, firings, and weak representation in a historically right-to-work state.
Obviously, the main social problem in America is that black people run everything, and us white folks as a group just can't get a fair break, right? So says Texas Governor Greg Abbott. As a lifelong white Texan, I can't tell you how amazing it is to see our governor come out unapologetically for a return to the old-time institutional bigotry. Absolutely freaking amazing. Apparently, Abbott fantasizes that hordes of black people are seizing control of our government, universities, banks, media, and other power centers, shoving aside more qualified and entitled whites. Going from fantasy to hallucination, he concludes that this takeover is caused by corporate and government hiring policies that bolster diversity and inclusiveness in our society. Even attempting to implement this democratic goal, he barks, is illegal because, get this, it violates federal law against discrimination. Yes, in Greg world, fighting discrimination against minorities discriminates against the white majority. So, Abbott has actually issued an edict directing state agencies and universities to shut down all hiring programs that include diversity goals. His official injunction declares that deliberately trying to stop excluding minorities leads to, quote, the alienation of individuals from the workplace. He means, of course, that some white people are alienated, that non-white people are getting job opportunities. Never mind that minorities routinely suffer extreme alienation from the workplace, i.e., exclusion. Abbott's attack on diversity also includes more exclusion of women, people with disabilities, LGBTQ people, veterans. Give him credit. He's an equal opportunity abuser. This is Jim Hightower saying Abbott and his right-wing ilk should realize that the price of creating an exclusive society with no diversity is that they would then be stuck living with people like themselves.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
New Gallup poll out. It's actually kind of a little shocking, to be honest. It's as low as it is. Record low, 15% of Americans view China favorably. 15%. It's dropped 38 points since 2018. And I guess coming out of the pandemic, to be honest, when you didn't get enough PPE and you realize that our supply chain is so heavily dependent on China and that we can't, buy a new car or do half the things we need to do, and inflation's part of our supply chain. Yeah, maybe I do understand why it's that low. Maybe it should be lower. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on, maybe why this is so low, and to share some of his testimony from the House Select Committee on Chinese Communist Party, and while examining China-U.S. relations. Asked our good friend Scott Paul to come talk with us. He's the president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing, AmericanManufacturing.org, their website. Scott, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, it is great to be with you tonight.
So what do you think of the polling? I mean, 15%, is that high for you, low for you? Where would you see that?
I kind of agree with you. I mean, that is super low. I mean, you got to work hard to get an approval rating that low. It's just not just people don't like you. You actually have to take active steps. And I have a feeling part of that is probably the spy balloon. Right? I mean, that certainly dominated headlines for a while. But to the point that you raised up in the intro, I think some of this has been the actions of the government, during, at the beginning of, and since the pandemic, with so you pointed out kind of the PPE, the response to begin with, the very real possibility that the origin of this is not what China says it was, that it, may have come from a lab, and more intelligence units within the federal government are saying that might be, that might be the source of it. And so I think all of that adds up. And any of the other news you hear about it is like they're thinking about helping Russia. They're certainly helping them economically. They say really aggressive things towards Taiwan, and so it is. There's a hole that has been dug that unfortunately is getting deeper every day without anybody's help at all.
No, the reason I bring that up and I ask the question is if anything, I mean, because we are a polarized country. We are a divided country. We've got red hats and blue hats. If anything could make us put our red hats and blue hats down, it seems like it would be this. This seems like something we could agree on. And I bring up the fact that you testified in front of this House Select Committee on Chinese Communist Party, a Republican committee. This seems like a perfect opportunity to go, hey, maybe we should all kind of coalesce around this idea that we should be making stuff here. I know we've been talking about this for at least 15 years, but maybe now's the time.
Yeah, I think it's beginning to be that time, and at least for Rick, I will say, I think that everybody now agrees that we have a problem. Okay, and not everybody was there before, right? They're like, oh, maybe there were some jobs lost, but it's helping consumers, or we're not even in a Cold War. Let's not worry as much. And so I think now members of Congress, both Democrats and Republicans, are firmly in the camp that there's a problem to be dealt with here.
No.
I would say, go. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was going to ask. Now you testified, on how we can maybe move down the road to fixing this, because I think everybody's ready. At least everybody I talk to is finally where I was 10, 15 years ago. Domestic production for domestic consumption. I think, and one of the great things that this president is doing, and the reason I love Joe Biden, is we're moving in that direction. Not as fast as I would like, and there are reasons for that, but we are moving in that direction. And you talked about some of the things that could help us move in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, I came with a list of ideas. I often think that it's one thing to present the problem, and that was part of my job and part of my task there was to say why this is a problem. But I also think that it's incumbent on us to suggest solutions as well that are actionable. And for me, those solutions included the investments that you referred to, and that's building on what we saw with semiconductors, with clean energy manufacturing, with infrastructure, expanding into a lot of other areas of domestic production. Pharmaceuticals comes to mind, specialty metals, rare earth minerals, processing. I mean, there's almost an endless list of this. I mean, the Biden administration had a 1,400-page supply chain report. You just got to basically look at that and dive into it. And then the other aspect of it is holding the Chinese Communist Party accountable for its behavior. And some of that has to do with trade policy, with tariffs, or enforcing the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, designed to bar goods coming from the region of China where there is a genocide and forced labor taking place, sharpening up our own trade tools a little bit, screening the outbound investment. I mean, I think a lot of people, and this is some of the feedback I got from the testimony, folks were like, man, I didn't realize the numbers were that big. That's a real problem. I was like, well, yeah, this has been building up. There is more than $1 trillion worth of U.S. company investment in China, $600 billion of intellectual property theft, a $380 billion annual trade deficit with China. So this is not trivial. This is real stuff, and it's going to take very sharp tools to get at it. So reviewing the investments that companies are trying to make in China, and stopping them if they are going to hurt our productive capacity in the United States, I think is also going to be an important.
No, that's a big thing. And to your point, there was a story I read today Maybe you saw this. This billionaire investor, Mark Mobius, is his name. He said that China is actually restricting people from taking money out of the country. He said he's got a giant HSBC account in Shanghai. He said he can't get his money out. Because they're restricting the flow out of the country. And it's something I've been saying for years. We need to have capital borders. I think we need to have borders. If we've got people who are hell-bent on the southern border, yet we got products going back and forth. You got money going back and forth. I'm a big supporter of borders.
Yeah. I think that having, border adjustability with respect to taxes, tariffs, all of this, I think is very important to making sure that we're defending our workers, our innovation base, our security. I think that's all critically important because the point, one of the points that I made to the committee members was that you're lured by this promise of cheap consumer prices, and t-shirts are cheap right now. They're cheap in a number of different ways, and people don't know or care how they're made, which is a big problem. But in exchange for that, if you view that somehow as an attribute, we've given up the keys to the 21st century economy. We've handed them to the Chinese Communist Party. And it's clear now that the Chinese Communist Party is not going to give them back and is going to try to design the rules in a way to benefit itself at the expense of all of us. And that's going to be a problem. When it comes to all of these industries where we're deeply leveraged into China and trying to get that out, like antibiotics, a great example of that, or rare earth mineral processing. Almost all of what I just described in the entire world takes place in China right now. Just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I mean, the weird thing is you talk to the average person, they have no idea how we got into this mess. And I mean, this is 20 years. This is not, in the grand scheme of time, this is a blip on, us being the producer of the world to our now being hyper dependent. In fact, yesterday I read a story over at the Wall Street Journal that said the headline, U.S. not ready for great power conflict. And they went through that we're not ready to get into a war. I know we're got the most powerful military in the history of civilization. You got to put that caveat out there. But we're not ready to build the machinery. We're not willing to fix this stuff. We don't have the productive capacity.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And the article you referred to, and again, I don't want to alarm people because our hope is that we're preventing a war or conflict with China by having the right kind of deterrence and the right kind of policy and ensuring that China knows that we won't stand for aggression. I think it's
I'm a Teddy Roosevelt fan. Walk softly right. and carry a big stick. The walk softly part's something we struggle with, but I think you still have to have the big stick.
Yeah, that's right. And this article referred to war games that take place, and these are simulations, and they're very important to understand. But in all of these simulations, if China were to invade Taiwan with amphibious landings, it's estimated that we would run out of missiles in the Pacific Theater in a week. In a week, we'd be done. We'd be out of missiles. And so, and you can't just grow them on trees. I mean, they take, months and years to produce because they're very high tech and they cost some money. And so, it is like, we need to arm Ukraine. We totally need to do that. And I just, I hate to say let's enlarge our defense budget because we spend so much already, but we can certainly devote more of that to stuff that we're going to need in the case of a strategic conflict.
Or more importantly, we need to have manufacturing capacity that we could transition, that we could move over. I mean, you go back to the lesson that I learned from World War II, and maybe I learned the wrong one, is have your own energy supply, which we do, and have a manufacturing base that you can then turn into war production in the event that you need to. And we did that.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. It was our friends, the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, and our defense industrial base and our energy independence that made all the difference, right, in that. Those are things you couldn't take away from us. Now, unfortunately, with respect to our defense industrial base, you've seen a degradation of that. And so we have to, in a sense, ration the arms that we're giving to Ukraine because we're running low on stock. And then we've discovered that as low as we are, our allies are even worse shape. They haven't been making the stuff they're supposed to be making as well. And so, it is we should be spending the federal budget on things that are going to be investing in our country. We also need to make sure that we have the deterrence to protect our own borders and our alliances as well. Yep. And so that's going to be a big piece of this as we move ahead.
No, I'm right there with you. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show with Scott Paul. Scott's the president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing, AmericanManufacturing.org, the website. We'll get links out on social media. You can check out the incredible work they do. Now, one of the things you talk about that we've talked about in the past that I think is really important, ending normalized trade status. Ending the permanent normal trade relation status that China has. I don't think we should have ever given it to them. I've said for years it was a huge mistake. I know they were going to come along. They were going to be, it's the same thing with Mexico. Their wages were going to come up and all of that. And, the crazy guy with the big ears was right. Giant sucking sound. Same thing with China. It was worse though. Is it possible to end that and that decoupling? Were you asked about this? What pain would be part of that decoupling?
Right. It's a good point. And to all your Gen Z listeners who don't know who the guy with the big ears is this Ross Perot, by the way. He's in your history books, probably as a footnote, but he was actually right about this. You're right, Rick. So the normalized trade relations, and I focused on this. I said, look, China, and this is very clear. The Chinese Communist Party, they do central planning. Every 5 years, they have a plan. It's written out. We can see what they were doing. They had a program called Made in China 2025, where they said we want to dominate all these industries globally. So it wasn't a secret. It wasn't like we had to spy on them to figure this out. They did. But even with all of that evidence, we still made it worse. We made it worse. First, we gave them this normalized trade relations, which basically gives China 0% tariffs on almost every product coming to the United States, except for the ones, by the way, where we've added tariffs in the interim. And we didn't hold them accountable in any way when there was cheating on trade. So it was huge. So yes, we should suspend normal trade relations with China. If we suspend it, then that gives the president and the Congress some leverage on how to adjust the tariffs so that we can tighten the screws if we need to, and see what the response is, and see if there's, and do it in a way where we can reshore stuff. I think that would be very important. And look, this is a bill. I think there's definitely a version in the Senate side that has like 4 or 5 Republican co-sponsors. I think there's a Democratic version that's going to get introduced. There's going to be a competition for all of this. But I just want to make a point about this, Rick, before we leave this topic, is that, that suggestion, my testimony, all of this has prompted outcries from the elite opinion makers. Fareed Zakaria, Max Boot, these are 2 guys who write columns in the Washington Post, very serious people. Fareed Zakaria says, we have to stop this groupthink on China, that it's a strategic, challenge for the United States. Otherwise, it's going to lead us down the road to conflict. And this groupthink is dangerous. And, my thinking on this actually was not groupthink. I mean, we were very much the outliers at the beginning of this, and opinion has come around. The groupthink was people like Fareed Zakaria who were saying this is a slam dunk with China. Why are we even having this debate? Yeah. We shouldn't even have this debate. This debate is stupid. I mean, Bill Clinton basically, this is a stupid debate to have. 20 years from now, we'll be wondering why we even had this debate. It's such a slam dunk. And then Max Boot, columnist for the Post, said basically the same thing. It's like, this thing is so one-sided, all the information they're presenting. It's like, no, actually, these are all the facts. I have 50 footnotes in my testimony of where the facts came from. They're just upset that the Chamber of Commerce and the big businesses aren't getting their way on this stuff for a welcome change.
That's it. But here's the thing, and this is the part, and this is where I want to end this up. If we do this right, and this is and this angers me too, And we've talked about this. Reshoring manufacturing is going to be costly. We're going to have to invest in infrastructure. In fact, today, the story out is evidently Siemens is going to be bringing a $220 million rail car factory to North Carolina. Because we're going to be investing in rail cars. We're going to be investing in infrastructure. We're building stuff. This is good for business. Now, the weird thing is when Zakaria and Boot want those rail cars made in China and shipped here to be used, I would think they say, yeah, that's what they would want. And I have a problem with that.
Yeah. Yeah, I do too. And I was like, look, did you guys wake up from like a Rip Van Winkle nap from the 90s and end up here? Because we've had like 20 years of this neoliberal BS that we've seen.
Yep.
And we know how it works. We know how the script works. I mean, National Democrats have flipped on this for good.
Time.
Yeah, it's about time. And Trump, even though he did a lot of business in China, at least from a policy perspective, he put tariffs on Chinese products. So that is flipped too. And all these guys are so upset about it. It's like, where were you for the last 20 years? You were cheerleading China. You're saying this is going to fundamentally change China. It's going to open up. There's no way they can contain all of this. It's going to be more democratic. It's going to be more open. They're going to play by the rules, blah, blah, blah. And what we got was job losses, broken promises, and the select committee, which I hope does a lot of stuff to undo this damage.
I hope they do as well. Now, I look at those two, and I'll be honest with you. I can only think they've never lost a job or had to look a family in the eye that lost that factory job and have ended up losing their homes, or worse yet, the suicide rates and the domestic violence and the alcoholism and all of the negatives that have come to those communities that we saw last October as we traveled through a number of Midwestern states. This what our president is doing, what Joe Biden is doing, is about damn time, and it's the right thing, and we should all be getting behind it. Take off the red hat and the blue hat, get a hard hat, and let's get to work. That's simple.
Love it.
Scott, appreciate the time, man.
You bet. Thank you, Rick. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Good stuff as always. Our good friend Scott Paul. Check out his website, Alliance for AmericanManufacturing.org. He is the president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing. Back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
The phone lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1942. That was the day a house fire claimed the life of a true champion for working people. Lucy Gonzalez Parsons was born in Texas. Most of her childhood is a mystery, but it is thought she was born into slavery and was African American, Mexican American, and Native American. After the Civil War, she met and married a Confederate soldier, Albert Parsons. The couple had to leave Texas because they were in danger due to their anti-segregationist activism. They came to Chicago, where they became involved in the city's labor movement. Albert edited The Alarm, a newspaper for working people. Lucy helped to write for the paper. Together, they supported the fight for the 8-hour workday, giving speeches throughout the city. Albert was one of the 8 men tried for the bombings at a workers' rally at Chicago's Haymarket Square in 1886. Although it was clear he was not even present when the bomb was thrown, Albert was convicted and hanged. After losing her beloved husband, Lucy kept up the fight for working people. She was a founding member of the IWW, the Industrial Workers of the World. She continued to speak and write for the causes of women's rights and workers' rights. Because of her activism, the Chicago police called her more dangerous than 1,000 rioters. In 1915, she helped to lead a hunger march of thousands of people in Chicago. At the march, the iconic labor song Solidarity Forever was sung for the very first time. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
I think back to, the Clinton era where we were sold on this idea that this was going to be great. We're going to open up trade. We're going to trade. We're going to open up the largest market in the world to our products, and it was going to be great. People who are making 3 cents a day, we're going to be able to buy our farm equipment and all this. Understand, they knew agriculture was going to make out huge. Agriculture still is a really powerful lobby in this country. So opening up China to our agriculture was really important. And that's pretty much how it got sold through. But I remember, Clinton and the corporate neoliberal Democrats saying, "Oh, this is going to be great. We're going to create jobs." And I remember thinking at the time, this is going to be horrible because this is going to put us into even greater competition with desperate countries and desperate workers. I'm not against the Chinese workers, but if you're competing with someone who makes pennies on the dollar, you have a problem. And we were told, no, the American worker could compete with anyone. No, you can't. I know they love to puff up our ego and, we're the greatest. We're number one. No, you're not going to out-compete. One person is not going to beat 30. It's just not going to happen. Especially when you see the kind of massive investment that American corporations made over there, along with the Chinese who partnered with them, basically stole their technology. And I have no sympathy for companies that lost their technology, that intellectual property rights were stolen. None whatsoever. You deserve what you got. But what the Chinese did, and look, they were smart. They needed jobs for their people. They needed a whole bunch of investment, and they got it. They got greedy American corporations that come over there and give our future away for short-term gain. That's what happened. Corporate America got fat and happy, got rich. The investor class got rich. The working class got screwed. And you look at the country now and how divided we are. It is a direct relation to that moment. You go to those towns and look at the working people in those towns who remember how it used to be when the factory was there and those good union jobs provided good wages that reverberated through the local economy. So, Bob and Sally could have the local soda fountain, and John and Jan could have the local candy store, and, Mom and Pop owned Main Street because you had a factory that had disposable income for working people to be able to get into that local economy and get it going. As soon as that factory went, all those shops shut down. And what came to town was desperation and poverty, and then all of the negatives, the domestic violence, the alcoholism, the mental health problems, the opioid and drug addiction, all of that stuff. And they feel abandoned. The companies left them. The unions broke up because there was nothing there left, because the unions aren't made of money. Government didn't do anything for them. So they're angry, and Trump tapped into that. He was not stupid. He tapped into what was a very real angry moment. Now we've got a president who's actually doing something to bring some of that manufacturing back, to solve some of those solutions. I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com.
The has reached the shore.
World governments reach historic deal to protect the high seas. France to cover parking lots with solar panels. Plus, another Norfolk Southern train derails in Ohio.
Has anyone told the Republicans to be upset about it yet? All of those stories and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Thanks to climate change, Los Angeles got a big old snowstorm. California kids made snow bros. Look how cute that is. But then again, Californians deserve to have some fun because I believe California's only other weather option is fire.
Correct. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, the Green News Report just finished celebrating our 14th anniversary. We're now in our 15th year.
Yep.
And now, today, we are celebrating our 1300th episode of the Green News Report.
Kind of mind-boggling.
Congratulations. They were all excellent, except for that one.
Well, thanks anyway.
What do you have for us today?
Well, first, huge news. Nearly 200 countries have agreed to a legally binding treaty to help reverse marine biodiversity loss in international waters, which cover half the planet's surface, known as the high seas. After 20 years of negotiations, the treaty marks a major turning point for conserving the ecosystem services of the oceans amid intensifying exploitation from industrial fishing and mining, pollution from chemicals and plastics, and acidification from climate change. The treaty establishes a framework for conserving 30% of the world's land and ocean by 2030. That's part of a deal signed by world governments back in December. This new global treaty addresses issues with the current inadequate patchwork of regulations, which Simon Wormsley of the World Wildlife Fund, in an interview with the UK's Channel 4, says is critical to protect marine animals on migration routes.
For instance, whales in the whole of their migratory routes, because they're threatened from when they start traveling to when they finish traveling. So great whales and similar organisms like turtles, seabirds will be protected along their whole migration route.
Which is important because there were some regional pacts that might have protected those whales or those turtles in various places, but not for their entire route. Now, that has changed.
Exactly. The treaty establishes mechanisms and ground rules to manage marine biodiversity in vast ocean regions that are beyond national jurisdictions, like requiring environmental impact assessments for destructive activities like deep seabed mining and geoengineering experiments to combat climate change. In a major breakthrough, industrialized countries committed to increasing funding to help developing countries build capacity to be able to conserve and manage their biodiversity. A majority of nations must now ratify the treaty for it to come into effect. In the U.S., it's unlikely to garner the required 2/3 vote in the Senate over Republicans' objections.
And yet this administration, at least the one in the White House right now, I suspect will respect this treaty, even if it's not formally passed. So it took 20 years to get to this point, and then they still had to stay all night, overnight, on Friday before they could get this thing finished up on Saturday.
That's always the way with these major treaties. In other news, another Norfolk Southern train has derailed in Ohio over the weekend, the second such crash in Ohio in just over a month. Officials ordered residents to shelter in place until it was determined that the train carried no hazardous materials.
Oh, well, it's all fine then.
In the ongoing East Palestine, Ohio derailment disaster, the Environmental Protection Agency has now ordered testing for dioxin, a dangerously toxic byproduct from burning chemicals. Railroad unions say that rail workers have fallen ill at the Norfolk Southern derailment site, and concerns are also mounting regarding potential chemical exposure for first responders who rushed to the scene from more than 80 regional fire departments. In Minnesota, after state lawmakers passed a law establishing a target of 100% clean electricity by 2040, it may face a legal challenge from neighbor North Dakota. North Dakota regulators say Minnesota's law requiring clean electricity infringes on North Dakota's rights under the Dormant Commerce Clause in the U.S. Constitution because it will eventually phase out Minnesota buying North Dakota's dirty coal electricity.
Good luck with that, North Dakota.
Finally, France has enacted a new law mandating that all large parking lots be topped with solar canopies and streamlines efforts to install solar panels on already disturbed land alongside highways. It's all an effort to cut fossil fuel use and meet France's ambitious climate targets. The solar parking lots alone are expected to generate as much electricity as 10 nuclear power plants, but for a fraction of the cost of building just one nuclear plant.
Wow, and that's something you have been calling for at least 15 years that we've been doing this Green News Report. I guess they heard you in France. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com.
Are you tired of think tank approved corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I've been shocked that the interim CEO at Starbucks has been able to get away with not testifying and basically just thumbing his nose at the fact that they are one of the most abusive employers in the country at this moment. They're like on the most wanted list at the NLRB. And then they say, I'm not coming to testify. You'll do it. We'll do it my way, and we'll send somebody. That ain't going to fly. And good on Bernie Sanders for stepping up and saying, nope, you're going to bring your billionaire behind here, and you're going to testify. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on how big this is, how big it is to get Howard Schultz in that seat to answer for the crimes. I've asked Michael Sonata to come talk with us. Michael's a labor reporter over at The Guardian, theguardian.com, the website. Michael, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me, Rick.
So this is kind of a big deal, I think, that Sanders really, Bernie Sanders came out and threatened the subpoena, all this stuff to get Howard Schultz in the hot seat. It hasn't happened yet, but it looks like it might.
Yeah, it's scheduled for March 29th. There's supposed to be a subpoena vote to compel him to testify tomorrow, and down to the wire, I guess Howard Schultz, told Senator Sanders that he is willing to do so. So 3 weeks from tomorrow, I believe, is when that's going to happen. And in covering labor, I don't remember as high profile of a CEO being forced to appear in front of a Senate committee, which is going to be live streamed now. People can watch it, and is going to be grilled on union opposition and union busting. And I think that's really big for the Starbucks workers who, their campaign has still been going strong and kind of slowly ticking up the wins and the number of stores they've been unionizing since early last year, when they had a flood of stores. I think it was several dozen were filing union elections, and workers were just hit with there were store closures, around 200 workers involved in union organizing around the country were fired at Starbucks alone. There were dozens of unfair labor practice charges filed by workers and the union, and they've been slowly reviewed and gone through the NLRB. And there was a big ruling a couple weeks ago where a judge in Buffalo ordered the reinstatement of 7 workers, ordered a store in the Buffalo area, compelling Starbucks to bargain with them, even though they voted against the union just because the union busting was so bad. And he, didn't hold back on, just talking about how aggressive Starbucks has been in violating labor laws, violating workers' rights, intimidating them, just throwing everything at these workers to try to stop the union. And the companies and Howard Schultz has repeatedly in media appearances has said we're against the union and treated it like it's some outside thing that needs to be stopped and halted, while claiming they're not doing anything illegal.
No, but we had Stephen Greenhouse on last week when the news broke of the Starbucks thing, and as I said to him, if you're a union buster, if you're one of these union avoidance companies, it would be almost malpractice not to tell Howard Schultz to fire people at all of these different locations. Not all of them, just selectively one or two, to send a chilling effect, because the penalties are so pathetically low. I mean, what, you're going to have to promise not to do it again? Oh, I'm heartbroken. I mean, that's basically the penalty. You pay the wages that they would have lost minus anything they worked for when they were off, which most people have to get jobs to survive, and then the dreaded apology, the posted notice, or in this case, he's going to have to do a video.
Yeah, and Starbucks has, who's represented by the anti-union law firm Littler Mendelson, they've appealed every single ruling that hasn't been in their favor, which has been basically everything. They haven't won any single appeal on any of those cases. 22 workers at Starbucks have been ordered to be reinstated so far. I think most of them are still fighting those appeals, and it's just dragging out the process, delaying it.
And that's the point, isn't it, Michael? I mean, isn't that the point? You draw this out long enough to wear the workers out. You have a high turnover rate anyway, so half of the people are going to leave, and most people don't want conflict at work. They want to go do their job, go home to their families. They understand this, which is why our laws are so horribly broken. And the weird thing to me, and this is the most angering part of this, is this Howard Schultz, had Hillary Clinton won, probably would have been labor secretary.
Which is insane given, just listening to him talking about workers in any sort of interview. He just has no respect for workers, rights to unionize. He's openly opposed it, and they've just been really dismissive of breaking labor laws. I remember when the 7 workers in Memphis, they were the first Starbucks workers to win reinstatement, and in August Starbucks appealed that and they lost it, and they started going back to their jobs in September and October, and their PR people were still like, we disagree with this, we didn't do anything wrong. I was like, that's not really how it works. The process determined that you did. So I'm anxious to see. They've got some new PR people in there, so I'm anxious to see how they try to spin what's going to be going on. And obviously there's still a ton of stuff the labor board has to get through, and like you said, there's just the penalties are so weak. But the best that the movement has right now is people like Bernie, or judges ordering Howard Schultz, who came back. He was retired. Yeah. He wasn't at Starbucks when this started. He came back and he says it has nothing to do with the union, which is ridiculous. It's okay. It's just very, very coincidental and circumstantial. But
yeah, he just happened to come back during that Buffalo campaign and held that captive audience meeting where they brought everybody to some swanky hotel, and and they just browbeat him for an hour and a half. But he just came back because he loves them so much.
Yeah.
Crazy, crazy times. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're here with Michael Sonato. Michael's a labor reporter over at The Guardian. You can check out his work over at theguardian.com. We'll get links out on social media. You can take a look at that. I'm going to change gears for a minute because the talk here that we've been going through for the last couple of weeks has been all about East Palestine and the train derailment. In fact, there's been another derailment. There's been several derailments since. None, fortunately, as bad as the one in East Palestine. But there's this Rail Safety Act of 2023 that's now banging around, that now the BLET has endorsed. Any thoughts on this? Are we going to get something that's going to help make the rails safer, going to make the workers safer? Because you know this as well as we do. The workers have been saying that the rails are unsafe for a very long time. We were talking about it over the summer, that you got engineers who are saying, look, this isn't safe taking these things down the line. I've had workers reach out to me and say, it's bad. It's worse than even you're saying. And I'm saying it's pretty bad. Any hope in this?
I don't think it's a problem and like rail workers have been saying for months and months and months, it's not just a problem of the lack of safety regulations. It's a problem of the railroads have been cutting people. They've been squeezing the existing workers as much as possible to get, record profits. And, those record profits and the billions of dollars that these companies spend on stock buybacks, that's money taken away from safety and infrastructure improvements and actually going, doing the inspections and following safety regulations and the safety laws in place. And, they pour millions of dollars in for lobbyists to stop, and they've done this for years, opposing any sort of safety regulations, safety rules, any fines, any regulations with hazardous materials. And East Palestine is kind of emerged as a reckoning around this horrid safety record, but it's really going to have to, it's not going to make a difference if nothing changes with the staffing and the cuts and the precision scheduled railroading and the working conditions, because safety is always going to go out the window for the sake of profits at these companies.
Yeah.
And if you don't put things in place and put pressure in place to fix that and change that, like our transit system when it comes to trains in the U.S. is terrible. It's been declining. I think from like 2006 to like 2020, there was like a 20% decrease in the amount of cargo that's been on the railroads. When you look at other countries, they've been, expanding carloads. They've been expanding cargo. It is typically safer than trucking. It's more efficient. But that's not the goal. That's not the goal of these Class 7 railroads. These 7 huge railroad companies. Their goal is to, keep boosting out those record profits, boost the shareholder, and they don't care, and leaving it up to them. Things really have to change with the dynamic on that, and workers have even less labor rights under the Railway Labor Act than they do with the National Labor Relations Act that we were just talking about with workers.
So is this a moment, Michael, where you go, it's time to break up these 7, put more competition into it? Is this a moment where we say, maybe we nationalize the railroads, or we completely cut them off away from government control and allow workers to strike and be able to do some of this stuff? Because, as a railroader reminded me, they don't have a contract. You can't sue over contractual language. They have an agreement. And agreements, as you know, are made to be broken. So, contracts, you can't break a contract without getting sued over. But agreements, they're flexible. And that's where a lot of this stuff comes into play, where there isn't black and white language. It's black and white for the worker, but it's real squishy for the railroad companies.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what they've done. That I did a story where a former carman at Union Pacific had a recording where they confronted their manager about getting pushed back for flagging rail cars that had bad wheel bearings that needed to be fixed, and they complained. They said, "Stop taking cars off of these trains. We're getting flack from corporate. They want the trains running, and it's delaying the time. So we don't do that here. Just go about your day." So she was trying to do the right thing and make sure it's safe, and she was getting told by her manager, stop. And,
no, I saw that. That's an incredibly important piece, and that's just one person. And I've heard that from other people who didn't want to go on the record because of fear of retribution. And this is where I keep coming back to, we need a better system to ensure that this doesn't happen, because wheel bearings go. If you're noticing something, we do pre-trips for a reason. The fact that they've cut, pre-trip inspections down to virtually nothing is crazy to me. As someone who's done a couple of million miles driving a truck, it's important to make sure that all the wheels are round and everything's where it's supposed to be. And I don't know how you inspect a rail car in 90 seconds or 45 seconds for that matter. I don't know how you do it.
And the trains are getting bigger. I include that in the story, and that's been a big thing, that the trains are getting longer and longer and longer. So if one car fails, it can cause an even worse derailment, and there's still the same number of people, in charge of, a 2-mile train, and
Yeah.
they've gotten really, really long over the past few years. And it's been, an issue that was brought up, about 5 years ago, and it's just been getting worse. And East Palestine, that was a big train. That's a long train, the 150 cars about, and that just, I was talking to Jeff Kurtz from Railroad Workers United in depth about, this issue. And he was talking about like the electronic brake system. If the trains are that long, the force, it's not going to stop a derailment with that. And just it's just a bigger
No, it's a bigger train,
hazard.
and look, when the 23rd car goes of a 150 car train, that means that inertia from all those cars from behind it are just going to come piling on. Now, the other thing that I had questioned at the very beginning, because I know in the trucking industry a lot of equipment is leased out from different companies. There's no single ownership, and I found out that the rail cars aren't actually owned by the rail companies. Most of them are owned by third-party companies. So the idea is it's not our car. We don't have to fix it. That's somebody else's problem. Seems to be fairly prevalent. And in fact, the car that derailed, the 23rd car, was not owned by the rail company. It was privately owned. And those folks are looking to make even a little bit more of a margin because, they're cutting corners even more to get their piece. So it seems like a system that's designed for tragedy and destruction rather than safety.
Yeah, and there's has been calls from Railroad Workers United has been put this out that the railroads should be nationalized because you have these companies they're profit driven. That's what they care about. That's their goal. That's what their function is, and this is such an important industry for the economy. And we've obviously seen with East Palestine, when something goes wrong, it can go really wrong.
Yeah.
And this is a red flag that politicians and just the public have to keep adding pressure on, like, because we don't want something like this happening again. And we don't want it, whether it's a bigger community or just another community like East Palestine. Those people's lives are messed up forever. We've seen those pictures of those big clouds of smoke. The company can keep Norfolk Southern can keep saying, "Oh, it's safe, it's safe, it's safe," but what we're hearing and the property values, that place is never going to be the same for decades.
Those poor people are screwed, which is why you have to have regulations in place and you need people pushing to hold this railroad accountable. Just my thought. I want to finish up with one thing that I saw that caught my attention. I wanted to get your thoughts on. Evidently, Ford has applied for some patent technology that would allow them to repossess your car remotely. So you go into the grocery store to get a half-gallon of ice cream, you come out, and your car's gone. Evidently, no more Repo Man on TV, none of that. They're just going to, while you're sleeping one night, it'll just drive itself right out of your driveway. I don't like it. I don't like it at all.
It's very dystopian to see that. And, Ford has said, and they can say that they have no plans, until they do in implementing these cars. Any car with a computer basically can, this kind of technology can be installed in it, and whether it's self-driving cars that can drive away from the owner, permanently locking the car, harassing the driver, and I think anyone who has been late on a car payment or things like that, it's pretty common. It's been increasing over the past couple of years. Thousands and thousands of people go into missing car payments within 2 months, because if you have bad credit, your car payment is more expensive in this country. It's just very distressing to see people, this kind of technology and the resources being put into not helping people, not making cars more affordable or fixing transit issues. It's How can we interfere and intervene? Because people don't want their cars repossessed. So how do we insert technology into their vehicles that is private property? And and just reading the patent and reading kind of the explanations and the possibilities of where it can go is just very disturbing. And I think everyone who's reading that doesn't want to live in a world where you're just seeing a car drive by, no one driving it, and just it's getting repossessed, someone chasing it down the road like with groceries. It's not a world that I want to live in.
No, see, I had a kid who worked for me a number of years ago. He got caught a couple of times, hacking into the FBI computer, and my mind immediately goes, I can imagine that kid, hacking into the central mainframe at Ford and repossessing all the cars and them all coming back. I mean, I'm not fond of the kind of centralization of things. I'm not fond of digital currencies. I'm not fond of the kind of electronic surveillance that's going on. So this is just one more piece of, I'm not thrilled with this.
Yeah, I don't think the car companies need any new technology to help themselves. Who does this help? It helps that the car companies and the lenders, banks. Like, really, that's what we need resources for, and to give them more power and authority over the lives of individuals and over poor people that are falling behind on car payments. It's not something that it's just ridiculous.
Yeah. Do you find it is distressing as I do that we really haven't talked about what the future is going to look like as a country, whether it's automated work, automated vehicles, it's this kind of technology that's going to be used against poor people. I mean, we really haven't begun to even wrestle with what the future is going to look like in the brave new world of AI. And it's kind of frightening how far back, policy wise, we are, and how corporate America has the upper hand.
It is concerning. And, I think there's been some like good sci-fi movies kind of like addressing like dystopian realities of, what could happen. And, it is not talked about, and it's not communicated with the people that are doing the technology. And there's always complaints and stories about AI taking over jobs and automations taking over jobs, and that's really been it's used as like a sticking point against raising minimum wages and like food service industries. But those technologies are already existing.
Yeah.
If anyone who's used a self-checkout line in a grocery store knows it's terrible. It doesn't work, and the same companies will complain about theft when they put it in, install those things. So
Walmart didn't the guy at Walmart say he'd shut the whole company down over their theft problem? And I guess they claimed $3 billion in theft last year when they bring in something like $150 billion in profit or some obscene number. I mean,
they don't know if it's theft or shrinkage or just lost, and they just all lump it together. All these companies and the Walgreens CEO, I think earlier this year came out and said, I think we blew out of proportion the whole.
We lied.
Yeah.
Well, not surprising. Anyway, Michael, I appreciate the time. Always great talking with you, my friend. Great work. Keep it up over there at The Guardian, and look forward to having you back again real soon.
Thanks, Rick.
Good stuff. Michael Sonato, labor reporter at The Guardian. Make sure you check out the work that he does. TheGuardian.com, the website. We'll get links out on social media. You can take a look at that. Gonna take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1942. That was the day a house fire claimed the life of a true champion for working people. Lucy Gonzalez Parsons was born in Texas. Most of her childhood is a mystery, but it is thought she was born into slavery and was African American, Mexican American, and Native American. After the Civil War, she met and married a Confederate soldier, Albert Parsons. The couple had to leave Texas because they were in danger due to their anti-segregationist activism. They came to Chicago, where they became involved in the city's labor movement. Albert edited The Alarm, a newspaper for working people. Lucy helped to write for the paper. Together, they supported the fight for the 8-hour workday, giving speeches throughout the city. Albert was one of the 8 men tried for the bombings at a workers' rally at Chicago's Haymarket Square in 1886. Although it was clear he was not even present when the bomb was thrown, Albert was convicted and hanged. After losing her beloved husband, Lucy kept up the fight for working people. She was a founding member of the IWW, the Industrial Workers of the World. She continued to speak and write for the causes of women's rights and workers' rights. Because of her activism, the Chicago police called her more dangerous than 1,000 rioters. In 1915, she helped to lead a hunger march of thousands of people in Chicago. At the march, the iconic labor song Solidarity Forever was sung for the very first time. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Obviously, the main social problem in America is that black people run everything, and us white folks as a group just can't get a fair break, right? So says Texas Governor Greg Abbott. As a lifelong white Texan, I can't tell you how amazing it is to see our governor come out unapologetically for a return to the old-time institutional bigotry. Absolutely freaking amazing. Apparently, Abbott fantasizes that hordes of black people are seizing control of our government, universities, banks, media, and other power centers, shoving aside more qualified and entitled whites. Going from fantasy to hallucination, he concludes that this takeover is caused by corporate and government hiring policies that bolster diversity and inclusiveness in our society. Even attempting to implement this democratic goal, he barks, is illegal because, get this, it violates federal law against discrimination. Yes, in Greg world, fighting discrimination against minorities discriminates against the white majority. So, Abbott has actually issued an edict directing state agencies and universities to shut down all hiring programs that include diversity goals. His official injunction declares that deliberately trying to stop excluding minorities leads to, quote, the alienation of individuals from the workplace. He means, of course, that some white people are alienated, that non-white people are getting job opportunities. Never mind that minorities routinely suffer extreme alienation from the workplace, i.e., exclusion. Abbott's attack on diversity also includes more exclusion of women, people with disabilities, LGBTQ people, veterans. Give him credit. He's an equal opportunity abuser. This is Jim Hightower saying Abbott and his right-wing ilk should realize that the price of creating an exclusive society with no diversity is that they would then be stuck living with people like themselves.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So today, the nomination for Gigi Sohn, her name is, for FCC chair, happened. And again, I don't know an awful lot about her. I'll be honest. That's why I'm going to reach out to a friend to get some thoughts on who she was. And because we talked a little bit about this last week. And from what I had heard, this is someone who's going to restore, sanity to the internet, expand broadband access, be a good voice for communications in this country and do it in a way that's going to help average working class folks. We'll see what happens. Now, look, again, this is one of those moments. I don't know it all, but we're going to find out. And that's why I've asked Milo Vazilla to come talk with us. Milo is the co-founder of the Media and Democracy Project, mediaanddemocracyproject.org, the website. Milo, thanks for taking time for us.
Rick, thanks for having us. This is a grim day for us following the democracy media issues.
Last week we talked a little bit about this and why this was important. And as I went back and there was a number of hearings. This has been going on for a while, as I understand. So what held up her confirmation? Why was she the hill that the Republicans were going to fight on, and ultimately, I guess some Democrats too?
Excellent point. So it was a constellation of things. So let me just put a quick kind of summary just to remind some of your listeners who aren't totally up to date on how the FCC works. The FCC is supposed to help regulate communications across the airwaves, radio, TV, for the benefit of the American people. It's been delegated powers by Congress. There are things it can do and it can't do. But one thing it can do is it can help promote competition, and it can actually help democratize and do several things, such as help make net neutrality, which is kind of democratize how our information is used and information is spread across airwaves. And it can also control media ownership. It can prevent somebody from buying every radio station in the country and putting whatever they want. It can actually regulate that and set some rules there. The commission that runs this is set up by Congress to have 5 members, and Gigi Sohn was going to be the tie-breaking commissioner. The last commission was during the Trump era, was actually a Republican-dominated commission, and rolled back a whole bunch of regulations, allowing more ownership to be concentrated in fewer hands, which, as you know, that's not going to be good for Americans.
Right.
We need to roll back what the Ajit Pai Trump FCC did, and we've been waiting since Joe Biden was elected to start to undo some of those regulations. Until the commission is fully functioning, it cannot do that. So we cannot undo Trump-era deregulation of some of our communications. That's the big deal. So it was clear that Republicans were going to put a block to undoing anything of the Trump era that obviously helped big business. And big telecom partnered with the Republican Party, deep-pocketed. It is a $500 billion a year industry, the telecommunications. We're talking Comcast, Verizon. If you've got cable, you've got internet, your bottom line, most of those are a very handful of small companies.
Yeah, we're feeding into that.
Good. Well, yes, exactly. And so the idea is big telecom does not want to roll back any of the Trump era deregulations. So they were going to oppose anything that was going to make our FCC operational again. And Joe Biden nominated Gigi Sohn, who's a lifelong advocate for competition in broadband and TV ownership, diversity in ownership, and actually getting rural broadband to places in this country that are forgotten. I don't know if you remember during the pandemic, you see kids stuck on the school bus trying to do homework and that stuff because there's no broadband. We as citizens have put together a slush fund of about $40 billion that needs to be distributed. And we're waiting for the FCC to come up with a good strategy to do that. And the FCC is in charge of the distribution of those funds right now. It's been allotted, but it's not being distributed.
Right.
So now, as long as we don't have updated guidelines on how those funds are going to be distributed, they're not going to be distributed, and big telecom is going to have a larger say in how they're distributed.
Now, Joe Manchin, who was clearly the deciding vote in all this, as he has been, like co-president, I guess, he says his reasoning for this is years of partisan activism, inflammatory statements online, and work with far left groups was his rationale. Is that accurate? I mean, from the left, I saw that the big thing that I saw from the left is she would be the first openly gay FCC commissioner. I don't see that as a big deal. I could care less what you do. I want to know what kind of a job you're going to do. Is Manchin's statement accurate?
I think it's really important to actually, let's talk about who was in the Gigi Sohn camp and who was in the anti-Gigi Sohn camp. In the pro-Gigi Sohn camp were 400 organizations and individuals, including AFL-CIO, Communication Workers of America, diverse groups of major underrepresented communities, tribal nations, also communities of color, multiple diverse. It is a very broad coalition. I can send you the link and you can share that with your listeners. It was a massive, representing tens of millions of Americans. That's column A, diverse group, union folk, multiple, marginalized folks. And then in the other column, you have big telecom, Comcast, and the Republican Party, and a bunch of lobbyists, and Rupert Murdoch. So the column of when you start to actually see who do the numbers of people represent, you start getting a sense of which side is which. So where Joe mentioned would lie, he'd lie more on the side of it's big business, it's big telecom. I don't think he's a social justice warrior. I don't think he's really specifically, and the charges he's using are really disingenuous, if not outright lies, honestly.
No, I mean, ultimately, this comes down to big business, and it comes down to the money. Because one of the things that I didn't like about how the legislation was written is that we're going to hand over all of the broadband that we're building over to corporate America. We're not going to own what we're investing in. It seems stupid, but it was one of the ways that we could. It was one of the only ways we were getting it through. It was part of the negotiation process. So you end up having to deal with what you could get, and this seems to be one of those side fights that I don't think a lot of people quite understood. And even I, until you started talking about this, because she was not on my radar. Because, again, this isn't, I saw her in front of Ted Cruz, and, Ted Cruz with the nonsense. Oh, you donated to people's campaigns, and, trying to find nonsense. But ultimately, it's Joe Manchin who torpedoes this. So I guess the question is, where do you go from here? Look, we're going to be angry that we don't have someone. Where does the president go from here? And do you have hope that it gets done?
So the answer is just a quick follow-up on the Manchin connection. One of his major chief of staff associates left earlier last year to go work for Comcast, just so you know. Someone he's very close with. Kid you not.
Of course he did.
So back to where do we go from here? Well, yes, first things first, you have to give credit to Joe Biden to actually nominate Gigi Sohn to begin with. She absolutely was the right person. In another era where there was not a gigantic knee-jerk outrage machine from Ted Cruz to Fox to amplifying, there's this cottage industry to sabotage every single one of Biden's nominations. Kudos to him nominating a great person for the position, sticking with her and not bending. The failure comes from Senate Democrats for really not championing her and say, you know what, we've got the majority. This is the FCC. We need to get this done. So where do we go? So Biden needs to nominate someone else, but he doesn't just nominate someone and then they whir through and then they just kind of whisk right through the process. And then a month or two later, they're seated. It could take another 3 to 6 to 9 months. And especially if, if he nominates somebody that is, there's not that many nominees left of Joe Biden's. And so now their whole cottage industry will be primed to come sharp knives for whoever he nominates. But the answer is he has to nominate someone, but it'll take months to actually nominate them, which means things like net neutrality and the dispensing of these broadband funds that we've paid for is all going to be hung up until that gets done. So we have to push Joe Biden to actually nominate another person who's an advocate for broadband. Don't fall for nominating a corporate type right-leaning person. The FCC is designed to rotate control. Right. So it's staggered nominations. So it's not a bad thing if the Democrats that's the thing that's kind of lost in this. It's supposed to be that Trump had the majority when he was president. And it's supposed to be that the party in power can actually have the majority when they're in power. So this isn't some Democrats are gaining some illegal advantage by nominating someone that might be. It's supposed to work this way.
Yeah. But here's the thing. And this is what I was going to ask you. And these terms is the nomination going over top of the term so that, when the confirmation happens, half of the term is already over. So that, next term, in 2024, if we have a new president or whatever, does someone else come up and begin a new term where the balance of power goes? So maybe you only get, a majority for a couple of weeks or a couple of months.
Yeah, you said you're new to this, but you're very insightful. That's one of the problems. Is this is lost time that we don't get back. Is if the White House were to shift in 24, so will the FCC majority shift Republican if it happens to be a Republican, for example. And so that's why this was such a big deal. is there are no guarantees about 24, and some of the stuff that needs to be done now may not get ever done because of the sinking of this nomination.
And the thing is as someone who lives in a rural area, rural broadband is something that I'm really hot on. And as I understand, she was big on it as well. I mean, to me, it's the modern day electrification. You go back to the Truman era and the Electrification Act, where we literally brought electricity and plumbing to places that would have never gotten it because it wasn't profitable. It's the reason that I pay through the nose for the internet that we have here, and it ain't great. I think building this out in a way that helps rural communities and look, internet deserts in the city. That's where we should be spending good money. I fear that doesn't happen.
Agreed. And right now there's some foundational work that needs to be done of drawing the maps. And right now the maps of where broadband are being written by the broadband companies, and they're really not doing a very good job of that. And the oversight of that is done by the FCC. And right now they can't even oversight of the foundational work of where do we need broadband. Right now it's up to the broadband companies to say where we need broadband. And right now they're not being very accurate about that. If I could make one point about a lot of the criticism of Gigi Sohn, I see a lot of parallels with John Kerry's nomination and going after him for being a veteran. I think Republicans have done a very good job at taking people's strengths and turning them into weaknesses. In the same way, she is a lifelong advocate for broadband in rural communities. They flipped the script on that and made it seem as if there's some questions about her support for broadband in rural areas, in the same way John Kerry was a military veteran and they swift voted him. So they basically use that same strategy to take what are your perceived strengths, come at them directly, and actually wound you with them because they've got a good tactic.
Well, as I was reading through it, to make your point, Milo, and I think you're absolutely right. It's one of their MOs. They started talking about indigenous people and this stuff, so that when you talk about rural areas, you don't really think about indigenous communities. You're thinking about white folk out on the farm, and to be able to then say no, it's not white folk, no, it's those people. That's pretty masterful on their side, and was there not enough defense for her? I'm curious because look, again, I'm not taking sides on this. It just seems from the outside looking in, this was a hit job, a corporate hit job, but a lot of the same MOs.
Absolutely. So the way I look at this is in the document that an organization called Free Press Action put together, the 400 major organizations and advocates for her nomination. Former FCC members themselves endorsed her. There were tribal communities in that group. There were Hispanic communities in that group who supported her nomination. But corporate America is very good at forging ties with underrepresented and minority communities, donating, investing in infrastructure for these communities and their organizations, and directly or indirectly leverage some of that when it comes due. There's actually a sordid history of big telecom using communities of color to sink legislation in an astroturf sort of way. And I can't say specifically in terms of the tribal nations, but it is not unanimous that tribal nations did not support Gigi Sohn. There were a significant number of tribal community members who voiced support for Gigi Sohn. But and then the follow-up to that is there's a massive amount of money spent to sabotage these nominations that exceeds the amount of money that is used to advance these nominations.
So to wrap this up, because I want to put the bumper sticker on this. The simple bumper sticker here is this is big money saying we didn't want somebody who wanted to share it with other people. It's all about it's not about red or blue. It's about green. To steal Rupert Murdoch's bumper sticker. It's about the money.
Absolutely. And if I may, also rendering our government inoperable for the people. That's what this is. This is a government appointed agency that's supposed to stand up for the common good, basic services, allow for an informed public, because bottom line, the FCC and telecommunications aren't about Netflix. It's actually about making sure we all inhabit and get information about the world around us that is accurate and fair, and we stay informed so we can actually coexist and support this nation. And right now, the FCC has been rendered inoperative, generally speaking, and that is intentional.
Wow. I know this has just happened. Anyone we're looking at as someone to be thrown out as the next chum for the Sharks? Any basis that any things we're looking for in the next person?
I'm going to, right now, the answer is no. I'm going to trust Joe Biden that he in his administration had the insight to nominate someone of this caliber, just did not anticipate the full weaponization of the Republican Party and big telecom against their nomination.
Yeah. Well, Milo, I appreciate you filling us in on this. I'm sure we're going to have you back because I'm sure a nomination's going to come back. But this is frustrating. It's frustrating because, again, still not going to get the broadband built.
Agreed. I'd love to come back. Thank you for having me and talking about this issue and letting your listeners know, and you bringing this to the forefront, because this is going to be a chronic problem that needs to be out in the open and have light shine upon it.
Thanks so much, Milo. Milo Vasello. He's the co-founder of the Media and Democracy Project. MediaandDemocracyProject.org is the website. We'll get links out on social media how you can take a look at that. Going to take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. We'll talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1932, forever remembered as a tragic day. The nation was in the grip of the Great Depression. As the economy languished, car sales plummeted by 80%. Thousands in Detroit found themselves out of work. Bread lines in the city grew longer with each passing day. The city's unemployed council and the United Auto Workers came together to discuss a response to the crisis. They decided to organize a march to the Ford River Rouge plant. At that time, Henry Ford was one of the wealthiest people in the world. The crowd of as many as 5,000 workers assembled at the city's edge. They had with them a list of 14 demands, including a return to work, the right to unionize, and an end to discrimination in hiring. As the marchers reached the Dearborn, Michigan auto plant site, they were greeted with tear gas shot by police and company security forces. Some of the workers responded by throwing dirt clods and rocks. The police retreated, then regrouped to aim fire hoses at the demonstrators. Suddenly, the sound of gunfire filled the air, and in a hail of bullets, 4 marchers fell dead. A 5th later died from his wounds. The Ford March had turned into a bloody massacre. More than 60,000 marched in the funeral procession for the slain workers who lie in solidarity, buried together. The 5th, Curtis Williams, an African-American, was refused burial in the city's segregated cemetery. The workers hired an airplane and spread his ashes over the Ford plant. The sacrifice of these men have not been forgotten. Over the next decade, the auto industry became one of the strongholds of U.S. labor organizing, helping to raise the living standards of all workers. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2. Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. So you remember this guy, his name is Paul Sherrill. Paul is a state representative in Tennessee. Remember I said, during Black History Month, Paul thought it was a great idea to say that he was all in favor of executing people by firing squad, sign my name on. But he wanted to amend it to allow hanging by a tree. Yeah, Tennessee, hanging by a tree during Black History Month. Yeah, sign him up. And then he kind of backed out of that, and well, maybe not. Then, evidently, he decided, well, for Black History Month, maybe we go and we change the names of all the highway parts that are named after, notable people. For instance, in Nashville, there's the Representative John Lewis Way. John Lewis was from the area, civil rights icon, congressman from Georgia for decades. They named a portion of the highway after him. Well, you have Paul, who said, we should name that after Donald Trump. And evidently wanted to, as well, rename part of the Dr. Martin Luther King Boulevard and the James Robertson Parkway to President Donald Trump Boulevard. Now, get ready for this, because the crazy right is going to try to do for Trump what they were able to get away with for Reagan, because there was a concerted effort after Reagan left the White House to slap his name all over everything. And it was a PR campaign more than anything to get people to go, no, Ronnie's a good guy. All of those investigations and indictments and, the Iran-Contra and all that stuff couldn't possibly be. They named an airport after him. They named every library after him. They named a road and a bridge and a school. They named stuff. He wouldn't do such a thing. You're going to start seeing people like Paul here saying we should be naming everything after Donald Trump. And what's interesting is there are people who are all in favor of it. Now, evidently, there was so much blowback, and this is the good part. Just like the hanging by a tree got a reaction and Paul had to backpedal, he's backpedaling because people are busting his you-know-whats. He has withdrawn the bill to do that. And you go, is it just for the attention? Part of me goes, yeah. Part of me, there are people who believe, hey, I just need to be seen. I need to be seen. I need the attention. We live in a social media era where, we need likes and attention and follows and clicks and views and all of that stuff. I get it. But most of the time you want that attention to be, somewhat positive. You don't want everyone to go, you're a giant, orifice. Just kind of throwing that out there. Yeah. Such fun and entertainment from our friends on the right. And the thing is, while we talk about how crazy they are on these fronts, the legislation that they are moving is really, really terrible. And they've got massive think tanks that they spend enormous amounts of money. I mean, really an enormous sum of money to go after and come up with really bad ideas. You look at the coordinated effort across this country that's going on to undo our child labor laws. You look at the coordinated effort to go after public education, to privatize and profitize our local public schools. You look at all of this coordinated money and power by a handful, by the wealthy. I mean, this Gigi Sohn thing is another example. Oh, she's a partisan. She's an activist. Everyone is partisan. Everyone. And yet, you ask yourself, at what point does the whole system break down? Because the rich and powerful, they're happy with a broken system. They're happy with gridlock in Washington. They're happy with gridlock in state capitals across the country. They're happy with doofuses coming up with stupid legislation that's only going to punish people and not make people's lives better. They're thrilled with that because they can continue to rob us blind. They can continue to take more and not make lives better. They can continue to punish. And as I always say, it's the cruelty is the point. Do you think he didn't know it was Black History Month when he proposed hanging by a tree? Of course he did. It was the point. We live in most certainly scary times. I want to hear your thoughts, though. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you miss any portion of the program, make sure you grab the podcast. Wherever you get your favorite podcast, you will find ours. From iTunes to iHeart, Stitcher to Podbean, and everywhere in between, we will be found. You got something on your mind? I want to hear it. Appreciate you listening, tuning in. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.